Today's sharing is by none other Brother Ananda Fong on the first council meeting. Let's hear what Brother Ananda will have to say. What do you, Brother Ananda?
Thank you, Brother Terence. Let me share screen. Okay, let me have a very short puja. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. As D.D. Terence has kindly introduced, today's topic is on the first Sangha or the Buddhist Council. The top portion of this title you can see on the map of the Indian continent, the location of the first council, the Saptapani caves just outside of Rajagaha or present-day Rajgir, and the bottom artistic rendition of the council proceedings just outside the cave. Now, just to revisit the what they call the localities of interest during the time of the Buddha. And of course, Prince Siddhartha was born in Lumbini. And of course, he was brought up in the capital of the Sakyan kingdom, Kapilavatthu. And then the first sermon was conducted or given by the Buddha to the 5 ascetics at Sanath. Or in those days, it was called Isipatana. And he passed away at Kusinara, or today it's called Kusinaga. The Buddha spent many years at Rajagaha, of which the Satapani caves is just outside of Rajagaha, the capital of the Magadha kingdom. And also the Buddha spent many years at Savatthi, or rather just outside of Savatthi in the monastery called the Jetavana Monastery, the famous Jetavana Monastery. And Savatthi happens to be the capital of the Kosala kingdom, another very powerful kingdom in those days. And the last arrow pointing at Vasali or Versali, the capital of the Vajian Republic. This republic is interesting. There's no king, it's not a kingdom, it's a republic. These are some of the what they call kingdoms or countries and the localities where the Buddha spent. Now, this question of the first Buddhist council basically starts at Kusinara before the passing away of the Buddha. And Venerable Ānanda had a question for the Buddha, as recorded in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, Digha Nikaya Sutta number 16. So, formerly, Lord, on leaving their quarters after the rains, the bhikkhus would set forth to see the Tathagata, and to us there was the gain and benefit of receiving and associating with those very revered bhikkhus who came to have audience with the Blessed One and to wait upon him. But Lord, after the Blessed One has gone, we shall no longer have that gain and benefit. This was what the Venerable Ananda has mentioned to the Buddha. And the Buddha proceeded to also encourage those venerables and of course later generations of places of pilgrimage. And in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha mentioned 4 places of pilgrimage. There are these 4 places, Ananda, that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. What are the 4? The first here is, here the Tathagata was born. This, Ananda, is a place that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. So on the rightmost picture is the current site, which is actually now in the country of Nepal, where it has been discovered that the Buddha was born here. And this particular location in Nepal, Lumbini, and this structure houses the archaeological dig that uncovered the location of the birth of Prince Siddhartha. Now, the center bottom picture shows the inside of this archaeological dig, where pilgrims are privileged to be able to go in and take a look at the discoveries of the archaeologists to locate exactly where the Prince Siddhartha was born. Now, continuing, here the Tathagata became fully enlightened in unsurpassed supreme enlightenment. This Ananda is a place that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. Now, the top left-hand photograph is that of a Bodhi tree at Mahabodhi Temple at Bodhgaya, and the top right also is another angle of the same tree. Now, this particular Bodhi tree is not the original tree under which the Buddha sat under, or rather the Bodhisattva sat under and became the Buddha. That original tree has since passed away, and this is a replanting of a sapling brought in from Sri Lanka. Now, in the Mahabodhi temples, on the bottom left and the bottom right, we have two photographs that shows one in the daytime and one in the evening. And in the Mahabodhi temple, the center portion, you can see the altar in which there's a Buddha Rupa, where many pilgrims will file in to see this particular, shrine room and the Buddha Rupa. Now, continuing, here the Tathagata sat rolling the unexcelled wheel of the Dhamma. This Ananda is a place that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. And in those days, this location was called Isipatana, the deer park, in which the Buddha taught the Dhammacakka Pavattana Sutta, the first sermon to the 5 ascetics. Now, on the bottom, we have two arrows. The bottom right arrow is pointing at the Dhammak Stupa, and the photograph is seen from the eye level. And also on the bottom left, another arrow, you have the Dhammarajika Stupa, where the Buddha gave his first sermon. Certain websites it should be noted that some websites available on social media or in the internet refer to the Dhammarajika Stupa as the actual site in which the Buddha taught the first sermon. Yet other sites point at the Dhammak Stupa as the site where the Buddha taught the first sermon. But it is all within this archaeological dig location, where many pilgrims will come and visit. And the fourth location, here the Tathagata passed away into the state of Nibbana, in which no element of clinging remains. This Ananda is a place that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. And the top right, of course, of the artistic rendition showing the scene of the Mahaparinibbana with near the Buddha's head, Brahmas and the beings of other planes of existence coming to pay respects. And on the bottom, three reverence, some paying respect, some are very calm, clearly showing that they are arahats. Those who are lamenting and crying are those who have not attained arahatship yet. And the top left, you have the location that houses the bottom left picture of the scene of the Mahaparinibbana. This is the location where the Buddha passed away and attained Mahaparinibbana. The bottom right big stupa or mound is the location in which the Buddha's remains were cremated, just nearby. Now the Mahaparinibbana Sutta continues. These, Ananda, are the 4 places that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. And truly, there will come to these places, Ananda, pious bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, laymen and lay women, reflecting, here the Tathagata was born. Here the Tathagata became fully enlightened in unsurpassed supreme enlightenment. Here the Tathagata sat rolling the unexcelled wheel of the Dhamma. Here, the Tathagata passed away into the state of Nibbana, in which no element of clinging remains. And whoever, Ananda, should die on such a pilgrimage with his heart established in faith at the breakup of the body after death will be reborn in the realm of heavenly happiness. Now, just before the Buddha passed away, this is a scene of the last convert, the last formal teaching in which the Buddha gave to anyone. The wandering ascetic Subhada seated himself at one side and addressed the Blessed One, saying, "There are venerable Gautama, ascetics, and Brahmans who are heads of great companies of disciples, who have large retinues, who are leaders of schools, well known and renowned, and held in high esteem by the multitude of such teachers as Purana Kasyapa, Makali Gosala, Ajita Kesam Kambali, Pakuda Kachayana, Sanjaya Belaputta, Niganta Nataputta." Now, have all of these attained realization, as each of them would have it believed, or has none of them? Or is it that some have attained realization and others not? So this was a question posed by the ascetic Subhada to the Buddha before he passed away. And the Buddha's response was interesting. He said, "Enough, Subhada, let it be as it may." So whether all of them have attained realization, as each of them would have it believed, or whether none of them has, or whether some have attained realization and others not, I will teach you the Dhamma, Subhada. Listen and heed it well, and I will speak. Now, this particular summary in which the Buddha teaches the ascetic Subhada is of interest to all of us. In whatsoever Dhamma and discipline, that means whatever teaching by whoever, there is not found the Noble Eightfold Path, neither is there found a true ascetic of the first, second, third, and fourth degree of saintliness. Now, here the Buddha was referring a true ascetic, that means a practitioner of trying to discover the truth. Now, reference to the first, second, third, and fourth degree of saintliness refers to the attainment of nobility. Attainment, in the case of the first, pointing to the first stage of stream winning or sotapan. The second degree of saintliness, the sakadagami, the second stage of enlightenment. The third being attainment of anagami, the third stream entry or third stage of enlightenment. And the fourth degree, the final, means attainment of arahathood. Now, but in whatsoever Dhamma and discipline, there is found the Noble Eightfold Path. There is found a true ascetic of the first, second, third, and fourth degrees of saintliness. Now in this Dhamma and discipline, Subhada, is found the Noble Eightfold Path, and in it alone are also found true ascetics of the first, second, third, and fourth degrees of saintliness. Devoid of true ascetics are the systems of other teachers. But if Subhada, the bhikkhus live righteously, the world will not be destitute of arahats. This is another very, very important statement by the Buddha. Now, the Blessed One spoke to the Venerable Ananda, saying, "It may be, Ananda, that to some among you the thought will come, ended is the world, is the word of the Master, we have a Master no longer. But it should not, Ananda, be so considered. For that which I have proclaimed and made known as the Dhamma and discipline, that shall be your Master when I'm gone." Now, this statement clearly says that Buddha did not appoint another person to head the Sangha, to be the teacher, to be their teacher. But the Buddha clearly said that his legacy of whatever he has taught, his teaching, encompassed in Dhamma and discipline, that shall be the community's teacher. Then the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhu, saying, "It may be, bhikkhus, that one of you is in doubt or perplexity as to the Buddha, the Dhamma or the Sangha, the path or the practice. Then question bhikkhus, do not be given to remorse later, on which the thought the master was with us face to face, and yet face to face we failed to ask him. But when this was said, the bhikkhus were silent, and yet a second and third time the Blessed One said to them, and so on. And for a second and third time, the bhikkhus were silent. Then the Blessed One said to them, it may be, bhikkhus, out of respect for the master, that you ask no questions. Then bhikkhus, let friend communicate it to friend. Yet still the bhikkhus were silent. So even in this situation, the Buddha was giving opportunities for the monastics present to ask whatever questions or doubts they may have. And after that exchange, the Buddha uttered these last words. Behold now, bhikkhus, I exhort you. All compounded things are subject to vanish. Strive with earnestness. So these clearly were the last words of the Buddha as recorded in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. The bottom two artistic renditions show the rendition of the Mahaparinibbana scene. Now, around this time, delight and rejoice in the passing away of the Buddha. An old monk happened to be the same name as the earlier ascetic. This is an older monk, Subhada, was happy that the Buddha had passed away. Subhada, who left the household life in his 60s, had a misunderstanding with the Buddha. He told the others, do not cry, do not lament. We are free from the ruthless master. We are free from his advice. Do this, don't do that. Today we can do whatever we like. He exhorted lamenting monks to refrain from expressing grief for the death of the Buddha. We have got rid of the master. Now, in the Julavagga of the Vinaya text, Venerable Mahakassapa was not present at the Mahaparinibbana of the Buddha at Kusinara. So while he was proceeding from Pava to Kusinara with a large retinue, a naked ascetic of the Ajivika sect brought the news of the decease of the master to Venerable Mahakassapa. Now, this was alarming to Venerable Mahakassapa, as this comment was made within the monastic community. He was not an outsider, he was not a non-believer, but he was a Buddhist monk. So the body of the Buddha was still lying there, and such a disrespectful comment could be passed. Venerable Mahakassapa had also witnessed the dispute and discord amongst the disciples of Mahavira. Mahavira, the great hero, is an honorary title. Another name for this teacher or the founder of Jainism, Nikanta Nataputta, the leader of the Jains, after he passed away, before the Mahaparinibbana of the Buddha. So there was discord within the Jain community also. Mahakassapa was concerned that false doctrine, that is Dhamma and Vinaya, would be established soon after the Mahaparinibbana of the Buddha. Should there be confusion as to what the Buddha had permitted and what was not? So the history of the Sasana, both in the Sutta and Vinaya Pitaka, shows that there were rebellious monks. And there's a sutta quoted, we can dwell into it further, in the order during the lifetime of the Buddha. So even during the lifetime of the Buddha, there were already these kinds of attempts to break up the community. So the evil attempts of Venerable Devadatta to kill the Buddha and cause a schism in the Sangha. The quarrel between the Dhammadhara and the Vinayadhara monks in Gositarama at Kosambi. The famous alternative to this description is called the quarrel at Kosambi. In the 10th year of the Buddha's ministry, could not be settled by the Buddha's advice. In fact, the monks there asked the Buddha that, said that you don't need to get involved, we will settle our quarrels. And later, when the lay community found out that the monks were still quarreling and showed disrespect to the Buddha, or rather disregard for the Buddha, they decided to withhold their support, their armed support. So when the monks had no food to eat, they came quickly to their senses. and they sent a delegation to look for the Buddha, and they beg for forgiveness from the Buddha. Now, and the next one, Channa was arrogant. This Channa was the what I call the well-known Channa, the charioteer that took Prince Siddhartha rounding, and in which the Prince Siddhartha managed to see the 4 sights. This is the Channa we are talking about. So Channa was arrogant and refused teachings, instructions, and admonitions from other monks, as he prided himself as the charioteer of the master on the day of the great renunciation. And the 6 Chapagiya monks who behaved like gangsters when they wanted to take over a building at Jetavana. They were physically violent initially and later through threatening gestures at the monks. They also carried out formal acts which were not by rule in an incomplete assembly, acts that had been protested against and were not legitimate. Now, here there's some mention of interesting, try to carry out formal acts. Formal acts means Sangha Karma in an incomplete assembly, because in the Vinaya Pitaka, legitimate gatherings of monks to decide on the affairs of the Sangha need to have a quorum. So incomplete assembly clearly indicates there was no complete forum, and furthermore, you must be conducted at a what they call sanctified location agreed by all earlier. Now, further, the Buddha did not choose a successor to be the leader of the Sangha. And just to recap, now the Blessed One spoke to Venerable Ananda, saying, "It may be, Ananda, that to some among you the thought will come, ended is the word of the Master. We have a Master no longer. But it should not, Ananda, be so considered. For that which I have proclaimed and made known as the Dhamma and discipline, that shall be your Master when I'm gone." So hence the council had to be convened so that the Dhamma Vinaya could be recited and remembered. Now, there was no single source of teachings, as the Buddha was a wayfarer, in which he will go to this village and that village, he will meet this person, this monk or a lay person, and he will teach according to the temperament of the questioner or the person in front. The Buddha is well known for customizing teachings to the person who is listening, especially if those who have a chance of understanding or getting enlightened, as the Buddha would evaluate their intellectual and spiritual maturity. So there was no single person who knows all the teachings of the Buddha. Venerable Sariputta and Moggallana, the 2 chief disciples of the Buddha, had passed away before the Buddha. The Buddha was a wayfarer, and he gave discourses to different kinds of people, like kings, robbers, monks, nuns, courtesans, etc. The Dhamma Vinaya existed then only in the collective memory of monks and the lay community. So at the time, the memory of the Dhamma Vinaya, or rather the teachings of the Buddha, was still fresh. So the first council had to be convened soon, so that the true Dhamma and Vinaya could be chanted and remembered. So arrangements for the Sanghayana. Now the term Sanghayana, interestingly, Sanghayana means a council, a gathering of the monastics. Now elsewhere, you will see another reference to the first council as the first Sangiti. Sangiti means rehearsal. So at this Sanghayana or council, what do they do? How do they remember all that the Buddha has taught? That is called recitation. When we, from rote memory, we will chant it out. That's the origin of chanting or recitation for purpose of remembering. Do note that in those days, during the Buddha's time, there was no paper. There was no chance of writing it down. So by pure rote memory was required. So the venue of the first council or the first Sanghayana was at Rajagaha, the capital of the Magadha country. So Rajagaha was selected for the meeting of the council. It was held near the Sattapani caves. On this particular page is indicated by the top right red dot. Now, all other bhikkhus not involved in the council were asked not to come to Rajagaha for the rains retreat. King Ajatasattu the son of King Bibisara, was a firm believer in the Buddhist faith, and he would provide the necessary accommodation, food, and security for the gathering. The time, when was it held? It was convened approximately 3 months after the Buddha's Mahaparinibbana. It was observed during the rains retreat, and this Sanghayana lasted 7 months. The number of monks, there were 500 arahats. Now, initially, Venerable Mahakassapa chose 499 arahats from the assembly. A place was reserved for Venerable Ananda, who at the time of the passing away of the Buddha, right up to the eve of the Sanghayana, Venerable Ananda was only a Sotapan. He attained only to the first stage of sainthood. So the first Buddhist council was also known as the chanting of the 500. Why? Because there were 500 arahats. Only later in the evening, on the eve, that Venerable Ananda attained arahatship, and he joined the proceedings on the first day. This is the current picture of the the outside of the Satapani caves. Now, a council of arahats. In the Chulavaga of the Vinaya Pitaka, it is stated that the bhikkhu strongly interceded for Venerable Ananda, though he had not attained arahathood, as he had reached very high moral standard and he had learned the Dhamma and Vinaya from the Buddha himself. Mahakassapa eventually accepted Venerable Ananda as a result of the motion on the part of the monks. Fortunately, Venerable Ananda attained arahathood on the eve of the council. So just to recap, the chairperson of this council, or Sanghayana, was Venerable Mahakassapa. And the procedure was a simple one. With the permission of the assembled Sangha, Venerable Mahakassapa asked questions of the Vinaya of Venerable Upali, who would answer them. So questions were with regards to where, to whom, the subject of the reason of the Vinaya rule. For example, the subject, occasion, and the list is given here. Do note that with the formation of the first the Sangha, there were no Vinaya rules. In fact, for the first 20 or so years, only when the quality of the candidates joining, that means those who became Buddhist monks, the quality of the entrance dropped. Venerable Sariputta and the Buddha discussed at length, and only then did the Buddha institute one rule after another, depending on the inappropriate behavior of some of the monks. So the number of precepts in the Patimokkha, the collection of the monastic precepts, grew as incidents occurred over time. Now, getting to know a little bit about Ayasma Mahakassapa. Ayasma means venerable. Now, in the Theragatha, Gatha meaning poems or hymns of the Theras, the enlightened monastics, there is a verse 18 by Ayasma Mahakassapa. In the whole field of the Buddha's following, except for the mighty master himself, I stand the foremost in ascetic ways. No one practices them so far as I. The master has been served by me, and all the Buddha's teaching has been done. Lo, have I laid the heavy load I bore. Cause for rebirth is found in me no more. So when Ayasma Mahakassapa declares that there is no more rebirth for him, so signifying that he is an arahat. Now later, what is interesting is the master has been served by me. Now there's incident before he became an arahat, in which he did something which only he in the whole of the Sangha has ever done. No other monk has ever done this. Now, what happened was, when both master and disciple walked towards Rajagaha, on the way, the Buddha wanted to rest and went off the road to the root of a tree. Venerable Mahakassapa then folded his double robe fourfold and requested the master to sit on it, as this would bring him, Mahakassapa, much benefit for a long time. The Buddha sat down on Kassyapa's robe and said, "Soft is your robe of patched cloth Kasyapa. Hearing this, Kasyapa replied, "May the Blessed One, O Lord, accept this robe of patched cloth out of compassion for me." So this is the special serving in which Ayasma Mahakasyapa offered his own robe to the Buddha, and since he came from a rich family, clearly the robe in which he wore was of high quality cloth. Now, but Kasyapa, can you wear these hempen, worn out rag robes of mine? Full of joy, Kasyapa said, "Certainly, Lord, I can wear the Blessed One's rough and worn out rag robes." Now, what is interesting is that the Buddha at the time was wearing hempen, worn out rag robes, which was the custom of ascetic practices done in those days. Now, what happened? They will get the cloth from, not from donors. At the time, there was no such thing as katina, no such thing as offering of ready-made robes to the monastics. It was a practice in which the ascetics, whether Buddhist or non-Buddhist, they will go around looking for cloth, pieces of cloth, not what they call clean cloth or donated cloth. It was pieces of cloth thrown here and thrown there. And they would also visit cemeteries or charnel grounds, where sometimes some families were very poor. They didn't have money to buy the firewood to cremate their loved ones, the deceased loved ones. They will unwrap this kind of cloth, wash it, cut into the appropriate pieces, rejoin them, and dye them. And this became their robes. So these are what you know as rag robes. So this exchange of robes can be regarded as a great distinction bestowed on Mahakasyapa, an honor which was not shared by any other disciple. Now, by the exchange of robes, the Buddha may have intended to motivate Mahakasyapa to observe some other austere practices, what we know as Dutanga. As for instance, wearing only the triple set of robes, going for alms, and not omitting any houses on the alms round. This would be the mode of conduct in conformity with wearing the Buddha's patched rag robes. It was only 7 days after his ordination and the exchange of robes that Mahakasyapa attained the goal. It means attained arahatship. He was striving for arahatship, the mind's final liberation from defilements. This is a brief story. This was a brief story about Ayasma Mahakasyapa. And on this page, you can visit some of the suttas in which the Buddha was having a conversation or teaching Mahakasyapa. This is found in the Kasyapa Samyutta. The chapter Samyutta is a chapter on Kasyapa, found in the Samyutta Nikaya. And this is chapter number 16. Now, of note is the bottom, the last sutta in this list, SN 16.13, Saddhamma Patirupaka Sutta, which in a way is very much related to this topic of the first Sanghayana. Now here, I will provide some excerpts from this particular sutta. And this sutta translates as a counterfeit of the true Dhamma. Venerable Mahakasyapa was asking the Buddha, why with newly ordained monks, the new entrants to the monastic community, why is there need for more and more monastic rules? And the Buddha said that there was a decline. So the reply, that's how it is, Kasyapa. When sentient beings are in decline, the true teaching is disappearing. There are more training rules and fewer enlightened mendicants. The true teaching doesn't disappear as long the counterfeit of the true teaching hasn't appeared in the world. But when the counterfeit of the true teaching appears in the world, then the true teaching disappears. And this is interesting. And on this page, I thought it interesting to include some fake Buddha quotes posters. Note, in the modern day, with all the social media posting and apps and Facebook and so on, there is a lot of of sharing, indiscriminate sharing without verification, that they claim use the word Buddha in the quotes, which actually the Buddha never said so, or claim that it is a word of the Buddha by putting dash Lord Buddha or dash Buddha at the bottom, at the end of the quote, to claim that it was the Buddha word, in which you cannot find it in the Tipitaka at all. So clearly these are fake. And here the Buddha was referring to counterfeit of the true teaching. So in modern day, there are many counterfeits of the true teaching floating in amongst us. And the Buddha continued, it's not the elements of earth, water, fire, or air that make the true teaching disappear. Rather, it's the foolish people who appear right here that make the true teaching disappear. The true teaching doesn't disappear like a ship that sinks all at once. So clearly it is because of foolish people, those people who create all these fake Buddha posters and many other things, or claim that certain teachings are from the Buddha. But towards the end of this sutta, the Buddha says, leading to the persistence of the true Dhamma. So what leads? There are these 5 things that lead to the continuation and persistence and enduring of the true teaching. What 5? Is when monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen maintain respect and reverence for the teacher, in this case, the Buddha, the teaching, the Dhamma, the Sangha means the training, Sikkhapada, Sikkaya, and meditation. These 5 things lead to the continuation, persistence, and enduring of the true teaching. So this is, if monastics show disrespect, then it's left to the lay community to uphold the teaching. So we should try to prolong the existence of the Buddha Sasana and the teachings of the Buddha through respect and reverence for the teacher, for the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, for the training, that means the way in which to attain Arahathood, and to meditation. Ayasma Ānanda Thera. Now, the Buddha requests a reliable attendant. Now, for the first 20 or so years, the Buddha, Venerable Ānanda, was not the Buddha's attendant. So when the Buddha and Ananda were both 55 years, the Buddha called a meeting of the monks and declared, in my 20 years as a monk, as father of the Sangha, I have had many different attendants, but none of them has really filled the post perfectly, as again and again some willfulness has become apparent. Now I am 55 years old, and it is necessary for me to have a trustworthy and reliable attendant. Now, you must understand that from the day of enlightenment, the number of monastics the Buddha was teaching grew by leaps and bounds, as well as many lay followers. Lay followers, not just the ordinary businessman or the householder, but also kings and wealthy merchants and so on were coming. So many people were coming to the Buddha to discuss with him and so on. And therefore, the administration was greatly needed. So at once, all the noble disciples nearby offered their services, but the Buddha did not accept them. Then the great monks looked at Venerable Ananda, who was actually who had been held back modestly, and asked him to come forward voluntarily. At the bottom of the page, you have a list of the earlier monks who had served the Buddha. Now, when he was asked why he was the only one who had not offered his services, he replied that the Buddha knew best who was suitable as his attendant. He had so much confidence in the Blessed One that it did not occur to him to express his own wishes, although he would have liked to become the attendant of the Buddha. Then the Buddha declared that Ananda would be pleasing to him and that he wanted him as his attendant. Ananda was in no way proud that the master had preferred him to his great disciples, but instead asked a favor of having 8 conditions fulfilled. So interestingly, the Buddha was okay to have Venerable Ananda as his personal attendant, but Ananda did not say yes immediately. He asked the Buddha to promise 8 things first. Now, Venerable Ananda agreed to serve the Buddha regularly, subject to 8 conditions. And these were: he should not be given the robes received by the Buddha. Ananda should not be given the food received by the Buddha. Ananda should not sleep in the fragrant chamber of the Buddha. Ananda should not be asked to go with the Buddha to accept alms on invitation. And the Buddha should consent to invitations received by him, in a way to give him the authority to what they call vet all invitations received by him. The Buddha should give him permission to introduce visitors who came from afar to see the Buddha. He should be allowed to consult the Buddha whenever he had any doubts to clarify. And number 8, probably the most important, the Buddha should repeat to him the discourse preached in his absence. Now, this is important because Venerable Ananda only came to be the personal attendant of the Buddha after the first 20 or so years. So, which means the Venerable Ananda did not hear the first sermon and many other sermons because he was not even a monk at that time. So the number 8 portion, the Buddha should repeat to him the discourses preached in his absence. That's why we got a chance to read the first sermon, second sermon, third sermon, and so many other sermons which Venerable Ananda was not there at the time. Now he explained his reasons for this request in this way. If he did not pose the first 4 conditions, then people could say that he accepted the post of attendant only because of material gain. But if he did not express the other 4 conditions, then it would rightly be said that he fulfilled the duties of his post without being mindful of his own advancement on the noble path. So the Buddha granted him these very reasonable requests, which were quite in accordance with the teaching. From then on, Venerable Ananda was the constant companion, attendant, and helper of the Blessed One for the balance 25 years. Now, as recorded in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Buddha had high praises for Venerable Ananda. Now, the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus saying, "Bhikkhus, the Blessed Ones, Arahats, fully enlightened ones of times past, also had excellent and devoted attendant bhikkhus, such as I have in Ānanda. And so also, bhikkhus, will the Blessed Ones, Arahats, fully enlightened ones of times to come. Capable and judicious is Ananda bhikkhus, for he knows the proper time for bhikkhus to have audience with the Tathagata, and the time for bhikkhunis, the time for laymen, for the laywomen, the time for kings, for ministers of state, the time for teachers of other sects, and for their followers. In Ananda, bhikkhus are to be found 4 rare and superlative qualities. What are the 4? If bhikkhus, a company of the bhikkhus, should go and see Ananda, they become joyful on seeing him. And if he then speaks to them of the Dhamma, they are made joyful by his discourse. And when he becomes silent, they are disappointed. So it is also when bhikkhunis, laymen, and laywomen go to see Ananda. They become joyful on seeing him, and if he then speaks to them of the Dhamma, they are made joyful by his discourse. And when he becomes silent, they are disappointed. In a universal monarch, bhikkhus are to be found 4 rare qualities, 4 rare and superlative qualities. What are these 4? If bhikkhus, a company of nobles, should go to see the universal monarch, they become joyful on seeing him. And if he then speaks, they are made joyful by his talk. When he becomes silent, they are disappointed. So it is also when the company of Brahmans, householders, and of ascetics goes to see the universal monarch. And in just the same way, bhikkhus in Ānanda are to be found these 4 rare and superlative qualities. Now, moving on to Ayasma Upali, preeminent among those who know the Vinaya. Now, this particular picture is of interest. During the early days, in the Kapilavatthu, many of the princes, or rather relatives, also relatives of Prince Siddhartha, who later became the Buddha. And in this picture, artistic rendition, you see the Buddha seated. And the princes wanted to renounce. And Venerable Ānanda, or rather the Prince Ananda, was also among this group. They wanted to renounce, but they, what they call, push forward their barber, the one who cuts their hair, to let him get ordained first. Why? Because all the time the barber has been their subordinate, a worker in the palace. But in this case, they push forward this barber called Upali for him to be ordained first. And by being ordained first, he becomes senior to them. And only after Upali was ordained, the other princes, including Venerable Ānanda, was ordained in this particular scene. So in here you have the Upali Vaka collection of suttas given to Upali, or questions from Upali to the Buddha and so on, found in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of Tens. Now, this particular sutta, Upali Sutta, from the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Tens, Sutta number 31. Then the Venerable Upali approached the Blessed One. Bhante, on how many grounds has the Tathagata prescribed the training rules for his disciples and recited the Patimokkha? It is, Upali, on 10 grounds that the Tathagata has prescribed the training rules for his disciples and recited the Patimokkha. What 10? Now, this list is of importance. In a way, it answers the question, what are the precepts for the monastics for? What is the Patimokkha for? What benefit it is to them or society? Here the Buddha says, number 1, it is for the well-being of the Sangha, or the community of monastics. Number 2, for the ease of the Sangha, for keeping recalcitrant persons in check, because there are rules. If the person doesn't observe the rules, then the person can be can do whatever the person wants. Number 4, so that well-behaved bhikkhus can dwell at ease. Number 5, for the restraint of taints pertaining to this present life. Restraint of taints means the defilements of the practicing monks. Number 6, for the dispelling of taints pertaining to future lives. Number 7, so that those without confidence might gain confidence. And number 8, for the increasing the confidence of those with confidence. Number 9, for the continuation of the good Dhamma. And number 10, for promoting discipline. It is on these 10 grounds that the Tathagata has prescribed the training rules of his disciples and recited the Patimokkha. So clearly, the Patimokkha are for these 10 reasons. Continuing to the first Sanghayana. So in this way, the Parajikas and Vinaya rules of both Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni orders were agreed upon at this Sanghayana with permission of the assembled Sangha. Venerable Mahakassapa in turn questioned Venerable Ānanda. He was chosen as he was able to hold very well, and he had heard very much from the mouth of the Buddha. Being the Buddha's personal attendant for 25 years, and the Buddha had agreed on the 8th condition that Ānanda, that Buddha would repeat discourses given in his absence. The subject matter of Sutta Pitaka in the Nikayas was formulated as questions for Ānanda, who gave the appropriate answers. They were formulated in the same lines as those adopted for the Vinaya, to whom and where was the sermon given. So the person and persons who were given the sermon and the venue of the sermon. And because of that, since it's a repeat, or rather a recollection by Venerable Ānanda, the suttas will normally start with the Pali words, Evang me suttam, thus have I heard. Now, charges made against Venerable Ānanda, the lesser and minor rules. Now, the Buddha was said to have told Venerable Ānanda that the Sangha, if it so desires, may on his passing do away with the lesser and minor rules. Venerable Ananda did not ask for the specific lesser and minor rules, as he was mentally overwhelmed by the physical deterioration of the Buddha in his dying days. When he was faulted for the omission of the actual rules, he simply confessed to his omission. So according to the Chula Varga, diverse opinions were expressed by members of the assembly as to what constitute the lesser and minor rules. Venerable Mahakassapa and the council decided to keep all the rules. The Sangha could be criticized by the laity for doing away with rules laid down by the Buddha just after he passed away. He had previously advised Venerable Sariputta that for the Sasana to survive long, there should be many rules. Moreover, he had advised the monks in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta not to abolish the rules, which had been laid down as one of the 7 conditions for the welfare and harmony of the order. And another proceeding in the first council, the highest penalty of Brahmadanda to this Chana. Now, Venerable Chana had slighted every monk and was arrogant to the extreme. The penalty imposed was complete social boycott of Chana. When the punishment was announced to Venerable Chana, he was seized with profound repentance, shame, and grief. Dwelling alone, zealous, ardent, self-resolute, he attained the highest goal, arahatship. Henceforth, the punishment ceased to be effective. So clearly, as I mentioned earlier, this Chana, or later became Venerable Chana, was the charioteer of Prince Siddhartha when he went to see the, witness the, what they call the 4 sights, and accompanied the Prince Siddhartha on his renunciation to become ascetic Gautama. Now, the results of the first Buddhist Council. The settlement of the Vinaya under the leadership of Upali. The settlement of the text of the Dhamma under the leadership of Venerable Ānanda. The trial of Ananda, where all minor and lesser rules were retained. The punishment of Chana, which spurred him on to arahatship. The Sangha chant began with the 4 parajikas, the 4 defeats. The double Vinaya of the monks and nuns, and the 5 Nikayas beginning with the Brahma Jala Sutta. So here is a list of the contents of the Vinaya Pitaka. And further down, we have the Khuddaka Nikaya, which was later comprised of 15 books. Many of them are recorded here. Now, the chanting, recitation of the Dhamma Vinaya by the 500 monks was not completely accepted by all monks. Venerable Purana and his 500 disciples arrived at Rajagaha and were met by elderly monks who asked him to submit and learn the text. However, Venerable Purana would only bear in mind what he had heard in the Lord's presence directly from him. Now, in the 5th Nikaya, the Khuddaka Nikaya could not possibly have been made up then. Note that in the first council, there was no such thing as the Pitakas. The 3 Pitakas. The 3 Pitakas did not exist at the time. There was no mention of the Abhidhamma Pitaka. Now, what is important for the preservation of the Tipitaka is that of the formation of Varnakas. Varnakas are large groups of monastics. They're speakers who recite the teachings and are responsible for the spread of the teachings. And who was responsible for preserving the Dhamma? The Digha Nikaya by Venerable Ananda and his disciples. Majjhima Nikaya by Venerable Sariputta's disciples. Note that Venerable Sariputta had at that time already passed away, so it is left to his disciples. Samyutta Nikaya by Venerable Mahakassapa and his disciples. Anguttara Nikaya by the Venerable Anuruddha and his disciples. And of course, as mentioned, At that time, during the first council, there was no such thing as the Khuddaka Nikaya, but assorted what they call collections like the Sutta Nipata, Dhammapada, and so on. So in summary, the first Sangiti or the first rehearsal, the word Sangiti means rehearsal, where they do the chanting, comprises that it was held 3 months after the Buddha's Mahaparinibbana, the royal patronage by King Ajatasattu. It was held at the Saptapani caves outside of Rajagaha in the country of Magadha, attended by 500 arahats, presided by Venerable Mahakassapa, recitation of the Vinaya by Venerable Upali, recitation of the Sutta by Venerable Ānanda, and the Sangiti or rehearsal lasted 7 months. And the preservation via the Banaka system, in which large groups of monastics together will chant the same sutta at the same time. So it was not left to one individual to remember everything. Just a side note, the Vinaya Pitaka mainly deals with the rules and regulations of the order of monks, bhikkhus, and the nuns, bhikkhunis. It also gives an account of the life and ministry of the Buddha. So clearly, a lot of stories in the Vinaya Pitaka also. Indirectly, it reveals some useful information about ancient history, Indian customs, arts, sciences, etc. For nearly 20 years since his enlightenment, the Buddha did not lay down rules for the control of the Sangha. Later, as the occasion arose, the Buddha promulgated or initiated rules for the future discipline of the Sangha. And the bottom is a list of the 5 books comprising the Vinaya Pitaka. That's the end of this morning sharing. Sat Dhammo Cirang Titatu. May the good doctrine long endure. Sabbe Satta Sukhi Hontu. May all beings be happy. Over to you, Didi Terence.
After this morning's puja and listening of Dhamma sharing by Brother Ananda, now let us dedicate some merits to all beings, whether they are seen or unseen, big or small, near or far. Akasatha Chabummata Devanaga Mahidika Punyang Tamanumoditva Chiram Rakantu Loka Sasanang Ettavata Chamhehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Deva Sabbe Bhuta Sabbe Satta Numodantu Sabba Sampatti Siddhya. Dedication of marriage to the departed. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. And aspirations. Imina punya kammena mame bala samagamo satang samagamo hotu yavanipana patiya. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you everyone for watching. For other videos, please visit the links below. Bye bye for now.